Ancient Egypt, stretching along the life-giving waters of the Nile River, was a civilization that lasted for over 3,000 years. Imagine, for a moment, the sheer scope of that timeline. While we consider a century to be a significant span, the ancient Egyptians watched their culture unfold across 30 centuries, seeing dynasties rise and fall like seasons in an endless cycle of renewal and change. This temporal vastness created a unique perspective on power, responsibility, and the weight of decisions that would echo through generations yet unborn. The land itself shaped everything about Egyptian civilization in ways that modern minds can barely comprehend. Picture the ancient Nile Valley as it would have appeared to those early pharaohs, a narrow ribbon of fertile black soil cutting through vast expanses of golden desert sand that stretched endlessly toward horizons shimmering with heat and possibility. The river flowed northward with the certainty of divine will, carrying precious silk from the highlands of Africa, depositing it along the banks in an annual flood that brought both abundance and the urgent need for careful management by strong, centralized authority. This geographical reality created a unique situation where absolute authority became not just desirable, but essential for survival itself. The desert that surrounded the fertile valley served as both protection and prison, isolating Egypt from many external threats while creating an environment where cooperation and central coordination were literally matters of life and death. Without proper management of the flood waters, millions would starve. Without coordinated defense against occasional invasions from the desert peoples, Egyptian civilization could be swept away like sand before the wind. In this ancient world, where the boundary between the physical and spiritual realms was far more permeable than we can imagine today, the concept of divine kingship emerged naturally from the landscape itself. The pharaoh was not merely a political leader appointed by human consensus or military conquest, but a living god, the earthly embodiment of Horus, the falcon deity whose keen eyes could see across vast distances and whose divine nature connected the mortal world with the eternal realm of the gods. This divine status brought with it responsibilities that we can barely comprehend today, burdens that would crush any merely human ruler but which the pharaoh was expected to bear with serene confidence and unwavering strength. The pharaoh was personally responsible for the annual flood that brought life to Egypt. If the waters failed to rise sufficiently, it was seen as a sign of divine displeasure with the pharaoh's rule. If they rose too high and destroyed prepared fields, this too reflected upon the cosmic balance that the pharaoh was meant to maintain. The pharaoh was responsible for the movement of the sun across the sky, participating through daily rituals in the cosmic drama that ensured Ra's solar bark would continue its eternal journey from east to west. The pharaoh was responsible for the cosmic balance that kept chaos at bay, standing as a living barrier between the ordered world of Egyptian civilization and the primordial forces of destruction that constantly threatened to overwhelm all human achievement. Consider the daily reality of ruling such a vast and complex civilization, where every decision carried not just political consequences but cosmic significance. The pharaoh would awaken each morning in chambers constructed of massive limestone blocks, each stone cut and positioned with mathematical precision that reflected divine geometric principles. The walls were adorned with intricate hieroglyphic inscriptions that recorded not just the deeds of ancestors but the eternal truths of Ma'at, the fundamental principle of cosmic order, truth, and justice that governed all existence. The morning light would filter through high windows positioned according to astronomical calculations, casting long shadows across polished floors of red granite brought from quarries hundreds of miles to the south. These floors were not merely functional surfaces but cosmic maps, their patterns reflecting the movement of stars and planets, connecting the pharaoh's earthly palace with the celestial realm where the gods resided in eternal splendor. The very act of awakening each morning was a cosmic event, a daily resurrection that mirrored the sun god's emergence from the underworld. The pharaoh's first conscious thoughts each day were not of personal concerns but of the divine responsibilities that awaited attention. Reports from the night watch, updates on the Nile's water levels, messages from distant provinces, omens and portents observed by the priests, all of these demanded immediate attention and careful consideration. The weight of divine responsibility rested constantly upon these rulers' shoulders like a physical burden that grew heavier with each passing year of reign. Every decision they made rippled outward across the kingdom like stones thrown into still water, creating waves of consequence that could affect millions of lives for generations to come. A choice about taxation could mean the difference between prosperity and famine for entire provinces. A decision about foreign policy could determine whether Egypt's borders remained secure or became vulnerable to invasion from neighboring kingdoms that coveted the wealth accumulated along the Nile. The administrative complexity of ancient Egypt was staggering in its scope and intricacy. Imagine trying to govern a kingdom that stretched from the cataracts of Nubia in the south to the Mediterranean coast in the north, a distance of nearly 1,000 miles through territories as varied as the fertile Nile Delta, the stark beauty of the eastern desert, and the gold-rich hills of Nubia. Communication traveled at the speed of human messengers, whether on foot along well-maintained roads, by boat on the Nile's flowing waters, or occasionally by horseback for the most urgent dispatches. A message from the pharaoh's court at Memphis or Thebes might take weeks to reach the furthest provinces, depending on the season, the condition of the roads, and the political stability of the territories through which the messengers had to travel. Another few weeks would pass before a response could return, creating a communication lag that made real-time governance impossible and placed enormous pressure on provincial governors to make critical decisions without direct royal guidance. Within this vast bureaucratic machine, the pharaoh sat at the apex of a carefully structured hierarchy that had evolved over centuries of trial, error, and refinement. Below the divine king were viziers who served as chief administrators, high priests who maintained the spiritual foundations of Egyptian society, provincial governors who represented royal authority in distant territories, military commanders who defended the kingdom's borders and maintained internal order, scribes who recorded and transmitted information throughout the system, and countless other officials, each with their own specific responsibilities and spheres of authority. The pharaoh had to navigate this complex web of relationships while maintaining the appearance of divine infallibility that was essential to the entire system's functioning. Any sign of weakness or uncertainty could destabilize not just the royal court but the entire structure of Egyptian civilization, which depended on the population's faith in their divine ruler's ability to maintain cosmic order. The pharaoh could never admit doubt, never show fear, never acknowledge the human limitations that constantly threatened to overwhelm even the most capable rulers. The palace complexes where these pharaohs lived and ruled were marvels of ancient engineering and artistry, designed not just as residences but as earthly manifestations of divine power. Vast courtyards paved with perfectly fitted limestone blocks opened onto columned halls whose ceilings soared 40 feet overhead, supported by massive pillars carved to resemble the lotus plants and papyrus reeds that grew along the Nile's banks. These architectural elements connected the artificial grandeur of the palace with the natural world from which Egypt's wealth and power ultimately derived. The walls of these magnificent spaces were covered with painted reliefs depicting the pharaoh in various divine activities, making offerings to the gods to ensure continued cosmic favor, receiving tribute from foreign lands that acknowledged Egyptian supremacy, leading victorious armies against enemies who threatened the kingdom's security, or performing the sacred rituals that maintained cosmic order and prevented the forces of chaos from overwhelming civilized life. These images were not merely decorative but served as a form of visual theology that explained and justified the pharaoh's divine authority to anyone who entered the royal presence. Every scene told a story about the cosmic significance of pharaonic rule, the divine sanction that supported royal authority, and the eternal consequences of maintaining or abandoning the principles of Ma'at that governed all existence. The spaces themselves were designed to inspire awe and reinforce the pharaoh's divine nature through every element of their construction and decoration. Visitors approaching the throne room would walk through a carefully choreographed sequence of increasingly magnificent chambers, each one demonstrating the power and wealth of the Egyptian state while gradually preparing the visitor psychologically for the overwhelming experience of entering the divine presence. The final approach to the throne would often require climbing a series of shallow steps, literally elevating the petitioner's gaze toward the divine king who sat upon a throne of gold and electrum, wearing the double crown that symbolized dominion over both Upper and Lower Egypt. This physical elevation was not merely ceremonial but represented the cosmic hierarchy that placed the pharaoh at the intersection between earth and heaven, mortality and divinity, time and eternity. The materials used in these constructions tell their own story of Egyptian wealth and power, of trade networks that extended across the known world and organizational capabilities that could coordinate massive construction projects over decades or even centuries. Granite from Aswan, brought down the Nile on specially constructed barges, limestone from Tura quarried with copper tools and human determination, cedar wood from the mountains of Lebanon obtained through diplomatic treaties and trade agreements, gold from Nubian mines worked by prisoners of war and condemned criminals. Lapis lazuli from the distant mountains of Afghanistan carried across thousands of miles by merchant caravans. The pharaoh's court was a showcase of treasures gathered from across the known world, a demonstration of Egypt's ability to project power and influence far beyond its own borders. Even the simple act of sitting in judgment required the pharaoh to be surrounded by symbols of divine authority that had been crafted by master artisans using the finest materials available, each object carefully chosen for its symbolic significance as well as its aesthetic beauty. But beneath all this magnificence lay the constant pressure of decision-making that could affect millions of lives and determine the fate of one of the world's greatest civilizations. The pharaoh's court was filled with advisors, each with their own perspective on policy matters and their own understanding of what was necessary for Egypt's continued prosperity and security. Military commanders naturally urged aggressive expansion to secure Egypt's borders and increase the flow of tribute from conquered territories. They spoke of the need for strong defenses against the Nubians in the south, the Libyans in the west, and the various Asian peoples who periodically threatened Egypt's northeastern borders. High priests emphasized the importance of massive temple construction projects that would honor the gods and ensure divine favor for the kingdom. They reminded the pharaoh constantly that neglecting religious obligations could result in cosmic catastrophes, failed floods, military defeats, plagues, or natural disasters that would devastate Egyptian civilization. From their perspective, no expense was too great if it secured the gods' continued protection and blessing. Provincial governors requested resources to maintain infrastructure and deal with local problems that ranged from bandit raids to irrigation system failures to disputes between communities over water rights or territorial boundaries. They understood better than anyone at court the day-to-day challenges of governing a diverse population spread across vast distances, and they often advocated for policies that would strengthen local administration even if they reduced resources available for grand imperial projects. Foreign ambassadors sought treaties and trade agreements that would benefit their own kingdoms while positioning them favorably within Egypt's sphere of influence. They brought news of threats and opportunities beyond Egypt's borders, information about potential allies and enemies, and proposals for diplomatic arrangements that could enhance Egypt's security or economic prosperity. Balancing these competing demands required not only wisdom but also a willingness to make hard choices that would inevitably displease some faction within the court. The pharaoh who tried to please everyone risked pleasing no one, while the pharaoh who showed favoritism toward one group might find other powerful interests working against the royal will. In this environment, where every decision had cosmic significance and eternal consequences, the line between firm leadership and what later generations might call cruelty often became blurred. The concept of Ma'at, cosmic order and justice, provided the theoretical foundation for all pharaonic decision-making, but interpreting Ma'at in specific situations often required judgment calls that could appear harsh or even brutal to those who suffered the consequences. A pharaoh might order the execution of corrupt officials not out of personal cruelty or vindictiveness, but from a sincere belief that allowing corruption to spread unchecked would undermine the cosmic order that protected all of Egypt from chaos and destruction. Similarly, military campaigns that resulted in the deaths of thousands might be justified as necessary to protect Egyptian civilization from barbarian invasions or to secure resources essential for the kingdom's survival. The pharaoh's perspective was necessarily cosmic in scope. Individual suffering, however tragic, had to be weighed against the greater good of maintaining the divine order that protected millions of Egyptians and preserved the achievements of one of humanity's greatest civilizations. As we settle into our exploration of these ancient rulers and the impossible burdens they carried, it becomes important to understand that the actions we might judge as cruel were often the result of a worldview so different from our own that direct moral comparisons become almost meaningless. These pharaohs lived in a world where divine authority was not just political rhetoric but literal truth, where the stability of the entire universe depended upon the pharaoh's ability to maintain order through whatever means necessary. The evening breeze that once moved across the Nile would have carried with it the sounds of a civilization in constant motion, the calls of merchants in the bustling marketplaces, the rhythmic chanting of priests in the temples conducting the rituals that maintained cosmic balance, the steady sound of workers' tools shaping stone and metal into monuments that would endure for millennia. In the royal quarters, oil lamps would begin to flicker as the sun set behind the western cliffs, casting dancing shadows on walls covered with scenes of eternal life and divine triumph, reminding all who saw them that the pharaoh's authority extended beyond this world into the realm of the gods themselves. As we draw closer to understanding these ancient rulers and the weight of responsibility they carried, imagine yourself as a scribe or advisor approaching one of the great royal courts of ancient Egypt. The journey to reach the pharaoh's presence was itself a carefully designed experience meant to reinforce the divine nature of royal authority and the vast scope of Egyptian power, while gradually preparing visitors for the overwhelming experience of entering the presence of a living God. Your path might begin at dawn, as the first light of Ra's solar bark appeared above the eastern horizon, painting the sky in shades of gold and rose that the ancient Egyptians understood as divine emanations from the sun god's daily rebirth. The approach to any major royal complex started from a considerable distance, sometimes several miles from the palace itself, allowing visitors to appreciate the full scale of Egyptian architectural achievement while also providing time for psychological preparation for the awesome encounter that awaited. In the early morning light, the massive stone pylons that marked the entrance to the palace complex would appear as dark silhouettes against the brightening sky, their imposing mass serving as a testament to the organizational power that could move thousands of tons of stone with nothing more than human labor, copper tools, wooden levers, and the ingenious engineering that made Egypt one of the ancient world's greatest civilizations. These pylons were not merely functional structures but theological statements carved in stone, their surfaces covered with reliefs depicting the pharaoh's divine victories over the forces of chaos. The very act of passing between them symbolized leaving the ordinary world behind and entering a realm where divine authority shaped every aspect of existence. The shadows cast by these massive structures created pools of cool darkness that provided relief from the desert sun while also serving as symbolic representations of the pharaoh's protective power extending over all who sought royal favor. The avenue leading to the main entrance was typically lined with sphinxes, magnificent creatures combining lion bodies with human heads, often bearing the features of the reigning pharaoh. These were not mere decorations but profound theological statements about the nature of royal power and divine authority. The lion represented the pharaoh's strength and courage in battle, the fierce protective instinct that defended Egypt from all threats, while the human head demonstrated wisdom and divine consciousness that elevated royal authority above mere physical force. Walking between these silent guardians, a visitor would feel the weight of countless stone eyes observing their approach, judging their worthiness to enter the presence of the living God. Each sphinx was carved from a single block of stone, requiring months or even years of painstaking work by master craftsmen who understood that they were creating not just sculptures but divine beings that would guard the royal presence for eternity. The sound of your footsteps would echo off the massive stone blocks that formed the approach causeway, creating rhythmic percussion that seemed to announce your arrival to unseen watchers. Each block in this causeway had been quarried from distant hillsides, shaped with incredible precision by stonemasons who worked according to mathematical principles that reflected divine geometric order, then transported hundreds of miles by boat and human effort, and finally positioned with mathematical precision that we can still admire today. The Egyptian stonemasons who created these monuments worked with tools that seem primitive by modern standards: copper chisels, wooden mallets, stone hammers, and abrasive sand for polishing, yet they achieved a level of accuracy that would challenge contemporary builders equipped with power tools and laser levels. The joints between blocks were so tight that a knife blade could not be inserted between them, and the surfaces were polished to a smoothness that reflected light like mirrors, creating an almost supernatural gleam that reinforced the otherworldly nature of royal architecture. The mathematical precision of these constructions reflected the ancient Egyptian understanding that divine order manifested itself through geometric perfection. Every angle, every proportion, every spatial relationship was calculated according to principles that connected earthly architecture with cosmic harmony. Walking along these perfectly aligned causeways was like moving through a three-dimensional representation of divine mathematics, where every step brought the visitor closer to the source of cosmic order. As you drew nearer to the palace complex, the details of the architecture would become more apparent, revealing layer upon layer of symbolic meaning embedded in every decorative element. The massive walls were not blank surfaces but canvases for some of the most sophisticated art ever created, vast galleries of carved and painted reliefs that told the story of divine kingship through visual narratives that could be read by both the literate elite and ordinary Egyptians who understood the symbolic language of royal iconography. Carved reliefs depicted the pharaoh in various divine activities, receiving the breath of life directly from the gods, smiting enemies with a ceremonial mace that symbolized divine justice, making offerings at temple altars to ensure cosmic balance, or leading victorious armies back from foreign campaigns that had extended Egyptian influence across the known world. These images were not merely decorative but served as a form of visual theology, explaining the pharaoh's role in the cosmic order to anyone who could read their symbolic language. The colors that originally adorned these reliefs would have been brilliant beyond anything we can imagine today, creating a visual impact that would have overwhelmed visitors with its beauty and divine significance. Egyptian artists used pigments made from ground minerals that were often more precious than gold: malachite from the eastern desert for various shades of green, azurite from the same region for deep blues, realgar for brilliant orange, orpiment for golden yellow, and lampblack made from burned organic materials for deep black outlines and details. These colors were mixed with egg white or tree resins to create paints that retained their brilliance for thousands of years, surviving in tomb chambers where they still glow with almost supernatural intensity. In the morning sunlight, the walls would have blazed with color, creating an almost overwhelming visual impact that reinforced the otherworldly nature of the pharaoh's domain and reminded all who saw them that they were entering a realm where divine power manifested itself in visible form. The entrance to the palace itself was marked by massive wooden doors covered with sheets of hammered gold and silver, their surfaces decorated with intricate metalwork that depicted protective deities and royal cartouches spelling out the pharaoh's divine names in hieroglyphic script. These doors were not merely functional barriers but works of art in their own right, each one requiring the combined skills of woodworkers, metalworkers, and gem cutters who collaborated to create portals worthy of a living god. The very act of opening these doors required a team of guards working in precise coordination, their movements choreographed according to ancient protocols that added ceremony to what might otherwise be a simple practical action. The hinges were works of engineering art in themselves, designed to move massive weights with surprising ease while creating the deep, resonant sounds that announced the opening of the divine presence to those waiting beyond. Passing through the entrance, you would find yourself in the first of several courtyards designed to gradually prepare visitors for the ultimate encounter with divine royalty. This outer court was typically paved with limestone or granite blocks fitted together with mathematical precision, creating a vast open space that could accommodate hundreds of people during royal ceremonies while also serving as a demonstration of Egyptian masonry skills that bordered on the supernatural. The walls surrounding this court were lined with columns, each one a masterpiece of stone carving that supported massive stone lintels bearing inscriptions praising the pharaoh's divine attributes and recording the royal achievements that had earned cosmic favor. These columns were not merely functional supports but architectural statements that transformed the courtyard into a forest of stone, creating shadowed walkways that provided relief from the desert sun while also serving as galleries for the display of royal propaganda. The architectural sophistication of these spaces was remarkable even by modern standards. Egyptian builders understood principles of load distribution, structural stability, and aesthetic proportion that would not be rediscovered by European architects until the Renaissance, and they applied these principles with a mathematical precision that reflected their understanding of divine geometric order. The columns were not merely functional supports but artistic statements, carved to resemble bundles of papyrus plants, lotus flowers, or palm fronds, organic forms rendered in stone that connected the artificial palace environment with the natural world of the Nile Valley. Each column capital was a unique work of art, carved with details so fine that they seemed to capture the very essence of the plants they represented. Papyrus columns swelled at the top like the flower heads of the plants that grew in the delta marshes, while lotus columns opened like the sacred flowers that emerged from the primordial waters at the beginning of creation. These organic forms rendered in stone created a visual paradox that reflected the Egyptian understanding of the relationship between eternal principles and temporal manifestations. Moving deeper into the complex, you would encounter increasingly magnificent architectural spaces designed according to principles that created a sense of progressive revelation. Each successive courtyard was smaller than the last, creating a sense of intimacy and exclusivity as you approached the pharaoh's private quarters, while also increasing the density of decoration and symbolic content in proportion to the sacred significance of the spaces. The decoration became more elaborate and personal as you moved inward, with reliefs depicting not just generic royal activities but specific achievements of the current ruler. These inner spaces were where the pharaoh met with advisors, received reports from provincial governors, and made the decisions that shaped the destiny of one of the world's greatest civilizations. The walls themselves seemed to vibrate with the accumulated weight of centuries of royal decision-making. The very air within these inner courts would have been perfumed with incense burned in golden braziers placed at strategic locations throughout the complex. Frankincense and myrrh, imported at great expense from the lands of Punt at the far end of the Red Sea, created an atmosphere that was literally otherworldly, connecting the royal court with the realm of the gods through aromatic clouds that carried prayers and offerings toward the heavens. The smoke from these incense burners would have caught the light filtering down from clerestory windows high above, creating shifting patterns of light and shadow that added to the mystical atmosphere of the royal presence. These patterns changed throughout the day as the sun moved across the sky, creating a constantly evolving environment that reflected the dynamic nature of divine power while also providing a natural clock that marked the passage of time in this timeless realm. In these inner spaces, you might encounter some of the pharaoh's closest advisors and courtiers, each one dressed in fine linen garments that demonstrated their high status within the royal hierarchy while also reflecting the Egyptian understanding that clothing was a form of communication that conveyed information about rank, role, and divine favor. The highest-ranking officials wore kilts of the finest linen, so finely woven that it was almost transparent, while their chests were adorned with elaborate collars made of gold and precious stones. The social dynamics of the Egyptian court were as complex as the architecture that housed them, with every conversation, every gesture, every positioning of bodies in space carrying meaning within an elaborate system of protocol that had been refined over centuries of royal tradition. A courtier's proximity to the pharaoh during public ceremonies indicated their current level of favor, while their position during private consultations revealed their real influence on royal decision-making. As the morning progressed and you moved deeper into the palace complex, you would become increasingly aware of the presence of the pharaoh himself, even before seeing him directly. The very atmosphere of the inner court seemed charged with an energy that came from proximity to divine power, a palpable sense of significance that affected everyone who entered these sacred spaces. Servants moved with hushed efficiency, guards stood at attention with an alertness that spoke of absolute loyalty, and officials conducted their business with a gravity appropriate to their service of a living God. The anticipation of entering the pharaoh's presence was carefully cultivated by the physical progression through the palace spaces, with each architectural transition serving as a stage in the psychological preparation for the awesome encounter that awaited. Each movement from open courtyard to columned hall, from public space to private chamber, heightened the sense that you were approaching something sacred and powerful that transcended ordinary human experience. The Egyptian architects who designed these complexes understood the psychology of power and created environments that reinforced the pharaoh's divine status through every element of the visitor's experience. The sound environment of the inner palace was as carefully orchestrated as the visual experience, with the rhythmic chanting of priests conducting morning rituals in the palace temple creating a background of sacred sound that connected the royal court with the realm of the gods through ancient melodies that had been handed down through generations of religious tradition. The moment of actually entering the pharaoh's presence was the culmination of all the architectural and psychological preparation that had preceded it, a crescendo of spiritual and emotional intensity that few human beings in history have ever experienced. The throne room itself was designed to be the most magnificent space in the entire palace complex, a chamber that would inspire awe even in visitors who had already been overwhelmed by the splendor of the outer courts and columned halls through which they had passed. Imagine stepping across the threshold into a space that seemed to capture and concentrate all the power and wealth of ancient Egypt into a single, overwhelming sensory experience. The throne room was typically a long, narrow hall with a ceiling that soared to impossible heights, supported by massive columns that created a forest of stone reaching toward the heavens like the fingers of giants frozen in eternal prayer. These columns were often carved and painted to resemble the plants of paradise, transforming the architectural space into a representation of the divine realm where the pharaoh ruled as the earthly representative of the gods. The scale of this chamber was deliberately overwhelming, designed to reduce human visitors to insignificance while elevating the pharaoh to cosmic proportions. The distance from the entrance to the throne was measured not in feet but in emotional impact, with every step forward increasing the sense of approaching something that transcended ordinary human experience. The very air seemed to vibrate with accumulated power, as if the walls themselves had absorbed the authority of countless royal pronouncements over the centuries. The floor beneath your feet would have been made of polished stone, often a complex pattern of different colored granites and limestones that created geometric designs of stunning complexity and mathematical precision. These floors were not merely decorative but served as another form of visual theology, with their patterns representing cosmic principles and divine mathematics that govern both the heavens and the earth. Walking across such a floor was like walking across a map of the universe itself, with the pharaoh's throne positioned at the center of all cosmic order. The geometric patterns in these floors reflected the ancient Egyptian understanding that divine order manifested itself through mathematical relationships that could be expressed in stone. Circles represented the eternal cycle of the sun's journey across the sky, squares symbolized the four cardinal directions that defined earthly space, and triangles pointed toward the divine realm that existed above and beyond the material world. Every step taken across these patterns was a movement through sacred geometry that connected the visitor with the fundamental structures of existence. The walls of the throne room were covered with the finest painted reliefs in the entire palace complex, masterpieces of Egyptian art that depicted not just the pharaoh's earthly achievements but his divine activities in the realm of the gods. You might see the king making offerings to Ra and his solar bark as it journeyed across the heavens, receiving the symbols of life and power from Isis and Nephthys in their roles as protective goddesses, or standing before Osiris in the judgment hall of the dead where souls were weighed against the feather of Ma'at. These images serve to remind everyone present that the pharaoh's authority extended beyond the mortal world into the eternal realm of the gods, that his decisions affected not just the immediate political situation but the cosmic balance that maintained universal order. The artistic technique used in these reliefs was sophisticated beyond modern comprehension, with subtle gradations of color and shadow creating an almost three-dimensional effect that made the scenes appear to move and breathe in the flickering light of oil lamps and torches. The lighting in the throne room was carefully controlled to create maximum dramatic effect while also serving symbolic purposes that reinforced the pharaoh's divine nature. High windows positioned according to astronomical calculations allowed carefully measured amounts of natural light to enter the space, creating shafts of illumination that seemed to descend directly from the realm of the gods. Oil lamps and braziers provided additional illumination that could be adjusted according to the ceremony being conducted, while also filling the air with aromatic smoke that connected the earthly chamber with the divine realm. The interplay of light and shadow across the carved reliefs created an almost cinematic effect, with scenes appearing to move and change as the light shifted throughout the day. In the morning, certain reliefs would be illuminated while others remained in shadow, creating a visual narrative that changed with the passage of time. As the sun moved across the sky, different scenes would emerge from darkness while others faded away, creating a constantly evolving environment that reflected the dynamic nature of divine power. At the far end of this magnificent hall, raised on a platform of several steps that literally elevated the pharaoh above the level of ordinary mortals, stood the pharaoh's throne. This was not merely a chair but a work of art that represented the summit of Egyptian craftsmanship, a masterpiece that combined aesthetic beauty with profound symbolic meaning. The throne itself was typically made of wood covered with sheets of hammered gold, its surface decorated with inlays of precious stones, carved ivory, and rare woods imported from distant lands that acknowledged Egyptian supremacy. The back of the throne often depicted the pharaoh receiving divine protection from various deities, with Isis and Nephthys spreading their protective wings over the royal figure while Horus and Seth flanked the seat in their roles as divine protectors of royal authority. The armrests might be carved in the form of lions or other powerful animals that symbolized royal strength, while the legs of the throne could be shaped like the limbs of sacred animals that connected the pharaoh with divine power. Every element of the throne's decoration had been chosen for its symbolic significance as well as its aesthetic impact. The gold that covered its surface represented the flesh of the gods, imperishable and eternally brilliant, while precious stones were selected not just for their beauty but for their magical properties that would protect and empower the divine ruler. Lapis lazuli symbolized the night sky and connected the pharaoh with celestial powers, while turquoise represented life and regeneration that ensured the continuation of royal authority. The pharaoh himself, when seated upon this throne, would have appeared as the living embodiment of divine power, transformed by royal regalia from a mortal being into a godlike figure who commanded absolute respect and obedience. The royal regalia was designed to create this transformation through every element of its construction and symbolism, turning the human occupant of the throne into a visible manifestation of cosmic authority. The double crown of Upper and Lower Egypt, combining the white crown of the south with the red crown of the north, sat upon the pharaoh's head as a visible symbol of unified royal authority over the entire length of the Nile Valley. This crown was not merely a symbol of political control but a sacred object that connected the pharaoh with the divine powers that had originally established royal authority in Egypt. The very act of wearing the crown was understood as a form of divine possession, with the gods themselves speaking through the pharaoh's words and acting through the pharaoh's decisions. In the pharaoh's hands were the traditional symbols of royal power, the crook and flail that represented the ruler's role as both shepherd and disciplinarian of the Egyptian people. These were not mere ceremonial objects but tools of office that carried deep symbolic meaning rooted in Egypt's agricultural heritage. The crook, similar to those used by shepherds to guide their flocks, represented the pharaoh's responsibility to guide and protect his people through the challenges and dangers of existence. The flail, used in ancient times to separate grain from chaff during the harvest, symbolized the pharaoh's duty to separate good from evil, order from chaos, truth from falsehood in a cosmic struggle that gave meaning to all royal action. These symbols connected the pharaoh's divine authority with the practical realities of Egyptian life, reminding all who saw them that royal power existed to serve the greater good of maintaining cosmic order. The pharaoh's clothing was as magnificent as the throne upon which he sat, each garment carefully chosen for its symbolic significance as well as its aesthetic impact. The royal kilt was made of the finest linen, often pleated with mathematical precision that reflected divine geometric principles and decorated with gold thread and precious stones that caught and reflected light with supernatural brilliance. Over this might be worn a robe or cloak that reached to the ground, its surface covered with intricate embroidery depicting protective symbols and divine cartouches that spelled out the pharaoh's sacred names. Around the pharaoh's neck hung elaborate collars made of gold and precious stones, their weight serving as a constant physical reminder of the burden of royal responsibility while their beauty demonstrated the wealth and power that divine authority could command. These collars were works of art in themselves, often depicting protective deities in miniature or geometric patterns that connected the pharaoh with cosmic forces through wearable symbols of divine power. But perhaps most impressive of all was the pharaoh's facial expression and bearing, the result of years of training in royal protocol that had taught these rulers to maintain an appearance of serene confidence and divine authority regardless of the circumstances they faced. The pharaoh's eyes, outlined with kohl in the ancient Egyptian manner, seemed to look beyond the immediate concerns of the mortal world toward eternal truths that only divine rulers could comprehend. This expression was not mere theatrical performance but the result of a profound transformation that occurred when a human being accepted the cosmic responsibility of divine rulership. The pharaoh had to internalize not just the practical duties of governing a vast kingdom but the spiritual burden of maintaining cosmic order through every thought, word, and action. This transformation was so complete that courtiers often reported that the pharaoh seemed to become a different person when seated upon the throne, as if the divine crown actually channeled godlike consciousness through the royal body. Approaching this magnificent figure required following precise protocols that had been established over centuries of royal tradition and refined through countless royal audiences. Visitors would prostrate themselves before the throne, acknowledging their inferior status relative to the divine king while also demonstrating their submission to the cosmic order that the pharaoh represented. This act of prostration was not mere political submission but spiritual acknowledgement of divine authority that transcended ordinary human relationships. The very act of looking directly at the pharaoh's face was considered a privilege that had to be earned through demonstrated loyalty and service to the royal will. In many cases, visitors were required to approach the throne with their eyes cast downward, raising their gaze only when specifically commanded to do so by the pharaoh or by court officials acting on royal authority. This protocol reinforced the understanding that the pharaoh's divine nature made direct contact with ordinary mortals potentially dangerous for those unprepared for such overwhelming spiritual experience. The atmosphere in the throne room during royal audiences was charged with tension and anticipation that seemed to electrify the very air. Everyone present understood that they were witnessing the exercise of power that had been sanctioned by the gods themselves, authority that extended beyond the immediate political realm into the cosmic forces that governed the universe. The pharaoh's words carried the force of divine commandments, and his decisions shaped the destiny of millions of people throughout the Nile Valley and beyond. The acoustic properties of the throne room were as carefully designed as its visual elements, with the high ceiling and hard stone surfaces creating an environment where the pharaoh's voice would carry clearly to every corner of the hall while also adding a resonant quality that made royal pronouncements seem to come from beyond the ordinary human realm. When the pharaoh spoke, his words seemed to fill the entire space with divine authority, creating an almost supernatural effect that reinforced the understanding that divine powers spoke through the royal voice. The business conducted in these royal audiences covered every aspect of Egyptian government and society, from the most mundane administrative matters to decisions that would affect the kingdom's destiny for generations to come. Provincial governors would report on the condition of their territories, describing everything from agricultural productivity to border security to the loyalty of local populations. Military commanders would describe the readiness of their forces, the condition of fortifications, and intelligence about potential threats from neighboring kingdoms. High priests would discuss the state of the temples and the favor of the gods, reporting on omens and portents that might influence royal policy while also requesting resources for religious ceremonies and temple construction that would maintain divine favor. Foreign ambassadors would present tribute and negotiate treaties, offering their kingdom's submission to Egyptian authority in exchange for protection and trade privileges that could benefit both parties. The pharaoh had to process vast amounts of information and make decisions that balanced competing interests while maintaining the appearance of divine wisdom and infallibility that was essential to the entire system's functioning. Every word spoken in the royal presence was carefully weighed for its implications, every gesture observed for signs of royal favor or displeasure, every decision analyzed for its potential consequences across the vast network of relationships that held Egyptian civilization together. In this environment, where every action had cosmic significance and eternal consequences, the decisions that later generations might characterize as cruel or harsh often arose from the immense pressures and responsibilities that surrounded the pharaoh's position. The maintenance of Ma'at, cosmic order and justice, sometimes required actions that caused suffering for individuals in order to preserve the greater good of Egyptian civilization and maintain the divine balance that protected the universe from chaos. As the morning light continued to filter through the high windows of the throne room, creating ever-changing patterns of light and shadow across the magnificent reliefs and decorations, the weight of divine responsibility became almost palpable in the sacred air. In this space, surrounded by symbols of eternal power and divine authority, the human being who wore the crown of the pharaohs bore burdens that few people in history have ever been asked to carry, responsibilities that connected earthly governance with cosmic order in ways that modern minds can barely comprehend. Settling deeper into our contemplation of these ancient rulers and the impossible burdens they carried, we must understand that the pharaohs who history remembers as particularly stern or harsh were often those who faced the most challenging circumstances during their reigns. The cosmic responsibility they carried as living gods meant that every decision had to be evaluated not just for its immediate practical consequences, but for its impact on the divine order that protected all of Egypt from the chaos that constantly threatened to overwhelm civilized life. The weight of this responsibility was not merely theoretical or symbolic but manifested itself in every aspect of the pharaoh's daily existence, from the moment of awakening to the last conscious thought before sleep. Consider the daily routine of a pharaoh who has been awakened before dawn by the whispered words of advisors bearing urgent news that demanded immediate royal attention. Perhaps messenger boats had arrived during the night with reports of Nubian tribes gathering in the south, threatening the gold mines that provided much of Egypt's wealth and supported the vast governmental apparatus that maintained order throughout the kingdom. Or perhaps ships had arrived from the north carrying word that sea peoples were raiding the Mediterranean coast, disrupting trade routes that brought cedar wood from Lebanon, silver from Anatolia, and exotic goods from distant lands that demonstrated Egypt's far-reaching influence. These raids threatened not just economic interests but the network of diplomatic relationships that kept Egypt's borders secure and maintained the flow of tribute from client kingdoms. Maybe the reports concerned the annual flood itself, the life-giving inundation that sustained Egyptian civilization but which could vary dramatically from year to year in its timing and intensity. An insufficient flood threatened the agricultural cycle that fed millions of Egyptians and provided the surplus wealth that supported the army, the priesthood, and the vast bureaucracy that governed the kingdom. An excessive flood could destroy prepared fields, flood storage facilities, and disrupt the carefully planned agricultural schedule that had been perfected over centuries of experience. In the cool pre-dawn air of the royal chambers, lit only by oil lamps whose flames cast dancing shadows on walls covered with protective hieroglyphs and images of divine protection, the pharaoh must process this information and make decisions that will affect thousands or even millions of lives. There is no time for extended deliberation, no opportunity to seek consensus among competing factions, no possibility of passing responsibility to subordinates who lack the divine authority necessary to make such momentous choices. The divine king must decide, and decide quickly, based on incomplete information and contradictory advice from advisors who each have their own perspectives and interests, their own understanding of what actions will best serve Egypt's interests. The weight of these decisions is compounded by the knowledge that any sign of uncertainty or weakness could undermine the entire system of divine authority that holds Egyptian civilization together, creating chaos that could destroy in months what has taken centuries to build. The pharaoh's private chambers, where these crucial decisions were often made, were designed to reinforce the sacred nature of royal authority even in the most intimate settings. The walls were covered with painted scenes depicting the pharaoh's divine birth, his protection by various deities, and his eternal life in the realm of the gods. These images served not just as decoration but as constant reminders of the cosmic significance of every royal action, the divine framework within which all decisions must be made. These private spaces combined luxury with spiritual significance in ways that reflected the pharaoh's dual nature as both human being and divine entity. The royal bed was elevated on a platform that literally raised the sleeping pharaoh above the level of ordinary mortals, while also being surrounded by curtains that could provide privacy when needed. The bed itself was decorated with protective symbols and magical texts designed to ensure the pharaoh's safety during the vulnerable hours of sleep, when the divine consciousness temporarily withdrew from active governance. Even in rest, the divine king remained connected to the cosmic forces that sustained Egyptian civilization. The very materials used in the construction of royal furniture had been chosen for their spiritual properties as well as their beauty and luxury. Ebony would symbolize eternity and permanence, gold represented the flesh of the gods, and precious stones carried magical properties that would protect and empower the royal occupant. As the pharaoh prepared for the day's audiences and decisions, teams of servants would assist with the elaborate process of royal grooming and dressing that transformed the private individual into the public manifestation of divine power. This was not mere vanity or theatrical display but a sacred ritual that connected the human occupant of the royal body with the cosmic forces that justified and sustained pharaonic authority. Every element of the pharaoh's appearance had symbolic significance that communicated divine status to all who witnessed the royal presence. The carefully applied kohl that outlined the eyes represented divine sight that could see beyond the material world into the realm of eternal truth. The various crowns and headdresses identified the pharaoh with specific deities and cosmic principles, while the royal garments displayed symbols of protection and power that connected earthly authority with divine sanction. The process of royal decision-making often began in these private chambers, where the pharaoh could speak freely with the most trusted advisors without the formal constraints that governed public audiences. These intimate consultations revealed the human dimension of rulers who had to maintain divine infallibility in public while privately wrestling with uncertainty and conflicting pressures that would challenge any mortal being. Imagine the pharaoh seated on a simple chair of ebony and gold, still wearing the linen garment that served as royal nightwear, while advisors knelt on cushions nearby presenting their perspectives on urgent matters of state. The informality of the setting contrasted sharply with the weight of the decisions being made, whether to launch military campaigns that would send thousands of young men to their deaths, whether to increase taxation on already struggling provinces, whether to divert resources from temple construction to emergency relief efforts. The advice offered to the pharaoh in these private consultations often reflected the competing interests and worldviews of different factions within the royal court, each group understanding Egypt's needs from their own particular perspective. Military commanders naturally emphasized the importance of strong defensive measures and aggressive responses to external threats. They argued that showing weakness in the face of challenges would only invite further aggression from Egypt's enemies and potentially destabilize the loyalty of provincial governors who depended on royal protection for their own authority. These military advisors brought detailed knowledge of Egypt's strategic situation, understanding the complex web of threats and opportunities that surrounded the kingdom. They knew which neighboring peoples were likely to interpret Egyptian restraint as weakness, which trade routes were most vulnerable to disruption, and which fortifications needed reinforcement to maintain Egypt's defensive capabilities. Their advice was colored by their professional focus on security and their understanding that military strength was the ultimate foundation of all Egyptian prosperity. High priests, by contrast, stressed the importance of maintaining proper relationships with the gods through continued temple construction and elaborate religious ceremonies that would ensure divine favor for the kingdom. They warned that neglecting divine obligations could result in cosmic catastrophes that would devastate Egyptian civilization, failed floods, military defeats, disease outbreaks, or natural disasters that would be far more destructive than any immediate practical problem. From the priest's perspective, no immediate practical concern could justify risking the displeasure of the gods who controlled the fundamental forces of nature upon which Egyptian civilization depended. They brought to royal consultations a deep understanding of the religious traditions that legitimized pharaonic authority and the ritual requirements that maintained cosmic balance. Their advice reflected not just concern for religious observance but recognition that the pharaoh's divine status was the foundation of all political authority in Egypt. Provincial governors and administrative officials brought yet another perspective to royal decision-making, one grounded in practical experience of governing diverse populations across vast distances. They understood the day-to-day realities of collecting taxes from farmers whose crops had failed, maintaining order in distant territories where royal authority was more theoretical than practical, and balancing the competing needs of different communities within their jurisdictions. These officials often advocated for policies that would strengthen local administration and improve the efficiency of governmental operations, even if such measures reduced resources available for grand imperial projects. They brought detailed knowledge of local conditions throughout the kingdom, understanding which provinces could bear increased taxation and which were already stretched to their limits, which communities were loyal to royal authority and which might be tempted to rebellion if pushed too hard. Foreign diplomats and trade representatives added another layer of complexity to royal consultations, bringing word of opportunities and threats from beyond Egypt's borders. They spoke of alliances that might provide military support in exchange for tribute payments, trade agreements that could bring wealth but also create dangerous dependencies on foreign powers, and marriage proposals that could cement diplomatic relationships but also introduce foreign influences into the royal family. These diplomatic advisors understood the complex web of relationships that connected Egypt with kingdoms throughout the Mediterranean world and beyond. They brought news of political changes in distant lands that might affect Egyptian interests, information about new technologies or trade goods that could enhance Egyptian prosperity, and warnings about emerging threats that might require military or diplomatic responses. The pharaoh had to synthesize all of this conflicting advice while maintaining the appearance of divine wisdom and certainty that was essential to the entire system's functioning. The weight of these decisions was compounded by the knowledge that any sign of uncertainty or weakness could undermine the entire system of divine authority that held Egyptian civilization together. The pharaoh could not afford to appear human in moments of doubt or confusion. The cosmic order depended on maintaining the fiction of divine infallibility even when facing impossible choices. The psychological pressure of carrying such responsibility was something that few human beings in history have ever experienced. The pharaoh had to cultivate the mental discipline necessary to process vast amounts of complex information, weigh competing priorities, and make life and death decisions while maintaining the serene confidence that divine authority required. This psychological burden was as real and demanding as any physical challenge, requiring constant vigilance and emotional control that would exhaust ordinary mortals. As the morning progressed and the time for public audiences approached, the pharaoh would undergo the daily transformation from private individual to public divinity that was necessary for the maintenance of royal authority. The simple nightwear would be replaced by elaborate ceremonial garments whose every element had been precisely specified by centuries of royal tradition and religious requirement. The informal discussions of the private chambers would give way to the formal protocols of the throne room, where every word and gesture would be observed and interpreted by dozens of courtiers seeking signs of royal favor or displeasure. The psychological pressure of this daily transformation from human to God was something that few people in history have ever experienced. The pharaoh had to internalize not just the practical responsibilities of rulership but the cosmic significance of divine authority. Every action, every decision, every public appearance was simultaneously a practical governmental act and a theological statement about the nature of divine power and cosmic order. This transformation required the pharaoh to suppress natural human emotions and reactions in favor of the serene confidence that divine authority demanded. Fear, doubt, anger, and grief had to be carefully controlled and channeled into appropriate responses that maintained royal dignity while also serving practical governmental needs. The pharaoh could never afford to appear merely human, even in moments of greatest personal stress or uncertainty. In this context, the decisions that later generations might judge as cruel or excessive often represented desperate attempts to maintain the divine authority that protected not just the pharaoh's personal position but the entire structure of Egyptian civilization. A pharaoh who allowed rebellion to go unpunished risked not just political instability but cosmic chaos that could destroy the divine order upon which all Egyptian prosperity depended. A ruler who showed mercy to corrupt officials might be seen as abandoning the principle of Ma'at that sustained the moral order of the universe. The ancient Egyptian texts that describe these difficult decisions often emphasize not the human suffering they caused but their necessity for maintaining divine order and cosmic balance. The pharaoh's role as cosmic ruler required a perspective that transcended individual human concerns and focused on the eternal principles that governed the universe and protected Egyptian civilization from the forces of chaos and destruction. This divine perspective allowed pharaohs to make decisions that seemed harsh or cruel when judged by purely human standards but which were understood as necessary sacrifices for the greater good of maintaining universal order. The suffering of individuals, however tragic, had to be weighed against the cosmic necessity of preserving the divine balance that protected millions of Egyptians and sustained one of humanity's greatest civilizations. As the sun climbed higher in the sky and the morning light grew stronger, casting sharp shadows across the courtyards and chambers of the royal palace, the full weight of divine responsibility settled upon the pharaoh's shoulders like the physical weight of the elaborate ceremonial garments that transformed a mortal ruler into a living god, ready to face another day of cosmic duty and divine service. As we delve deeper into the mindset of these ancient rulers and the cosmic framework within which they operated, it becomes essential to understand how decisions were made in a world where divine authority intersected with practical necessity at every turn. The pharaohs who earned reputations for sternness often ruled during periods of crisis when the very survival of Egyptian civilization hung in the balance, their choices viewed through the lens of their own time and beliefs revealing a complex interplay between cosmic responsibility and human pragmatism. The reality of pharaonic decision-making was far more nuanced than modern observers might imagine, embedded as it was in a theological framework that made every choice a cosmic event with eternal consequences. Picture the pharaoh in the mid-morning hours, having completed the private consultations and ritual preparations that began before dawn, now preparing to face the formal audiences where divine authority would be publicly displayed and exercised. The transition from private consultation to public ceremony represented a fundamental shift in the nature of royal consciousness, as the human being within the divine role prepared to become the visible manifestation of cosmic order. Now, seated upon the magnificent throne in the great audience hall, surrounded by the accumulated symbols of divine power and earthly authority, the pharaoh must make public pronouncements that will be carried throughout the kingdom by royal messengers and recorded for posterity by court scribes whose careful documentation would preserve these decisions for future generations to study and judge. The weight of these moments was enormous, not just because of their immediate practical consequences, but because they would become part of the eternal record of the pharaoh's divine reign, contributing to the cosmic narrative that justified royal authority. The throne room during these formal audiences was a carefully orchestrated theater of power designed to reinforce the cosmic significance of royal decisions while also serving practical governmental functions. Every element of the setting had been calculated to maximize the psychological impact of royal pronouncements while also facilitating the complex administrative processes that kept the Egyptian state functioning. Courtiers arranged themselves according to strict protocols that reflected their rank and current level of royal favor, creating a living diagram of the governmental hierarchy that surrounded divine authority. Provincial governors stood in designated positions that indicated their territorial responsibilities and their relationship to the royal center of power. Each governor's position in the hall communicated important information about the status of their province, their personal standing with the pharaoh, and their role in the complex web of relationships that connected the royal court with distant territories. Military commanders occupied spaces that demonstrated their readiness to enforce royal will while also indicating their current assignments and the strategic priorities that shaped Egyptian military policy. High priests, dressed in their finest ceremonial garments that rivaled royal regalia in their magnificence, represented the divine realm that sanctioned pharaonic authority while also serving as intermediaries between the royal court and the various temples that maintained Egypt's relationship with the gods. Their presence in the throne room reminded everyone present that royal decisions had cosmic significance that extended far beyond immediate political considerations. In this setting, every decision became a cosmic event that reverberated through multiple levels of reality simultaneously. When the pharaoh pronounced judgment on a corrupt provincial governor, for example, the action was understood not just as administrative discipline but as the restoration of Ma'at, the divine principle of truth and justice that governed the universe and maintained the balance between order and chaos. The harsh punishment that might follow such a judgment was seen as necessary to maintain the cosmic order that protected all of Egypt from destruction. The theological framework that governed these decisions was complex and sophisticated, based on centuries of religious thought and practical experience that had refined the Egyptian understanding of divine authority and cosmic responsibility. The pharaoh's role as living God required not just practical wisdom but theological insight that could interpret divine will and apply eternal principles to specific historical circumstances. This integration of practical governance with cosmic responsibility created a unique form of leadership that has rarely been replicated in human history. Consider a specific scenario that pharaohs frequently faced: reports of rebellion in distant provinces where local leaders were refusing to pay taxes or acknowledge royal authority. Perhaps a provincial governor would send word that communities in his territory were claiming that royal demands were excessive and that their people were suffering from poor harvests, natural disasters, or disruptions in trade that made compliance with royal edicts impossible or unjust. From a purely human perspective, such resistance might seem understandable, even justified, particularly if the communities in question were genuinely suffering from circumstances beyond their control. Modern observers might expect royal authorities to investigate the local conditions, negotiate compromises that balanced royal needs with local capabilities, or provide assistance to communities facing genuine hardships. But from the pharaoh's cosmic perspective, any challenge to royal authority threatened the divine order that maintained the stability of the entire universe. The pharaoh's response to such challenges had to be swift and decisive, not because of personal pride or cruelty, but because the cosmic principle of Ma'at required that order be maintained at all costs. The punishment of rebels was understood as a sacred duty that preserved the balance between order and chaos, truth and falsehood, civilization and barbarism. The suffering caused by such punishments was regrettable but necessary, like a surgeon's knife that causes pain in order to remove disease and preserve life. This cosmic perspective created a decision-making framework that could justify actions that seem harsh or even brutal when judged by modern standards of proportionality and individual rights. The pharaoh who failed to punish rebellion risked not just political instability but cosmic catastrophe that could destroy the divine order upon which all Egyptian prosperity depended. From this theological standpoint, mercy toward rebels was not compassion but cosmic irresponsibility that endangered the entire universe. The decision-making process in such cases followed patterns that had been established over centuries of royal tradition and refined through countless similar situations. The pharaoh would first consult with advisors who possessed relevant expertise, military commanders who understood the practical aspects of suppressing rebellion and maintaining order in distant territories, administrative officials who knew the economic and social conditions in the affected provinces, and high priests who could interpret divine will regarding the appropriate response to challenges to royal authority. These consultations often revealed complex webs of causation that went far beyond the immediate question of rebellion, uncovering systemic problems that required comprehensive solutions rather than simple punitive measures. A province's refusal to pay taxes might be connected to disruptions in trade routes caused by foreign invasions, changes in the Nile's flood patterns that affected agricultural productivity, corruption among local officials who were enriching themselves at the expense of both the royal treasury and the common people, or the influence of foreign agents who were encouraging resistance to Egyptian authority. The pharaoh's response had to address not just the immediate challenge to royal authority but the underlying conditions that had created the problem in the first place. This required a sophisticated understanding of cause and effect that could trace connections between apparently separate events and identify the systemic changes needed to prevent future rebellions. The cosmic perspective that guided pharaonic decision-making demanded solutions that addressed root causes rather than merely treating symptoms. The military solutions that pharaohs often employed in such situations were designed to serve multiple purposes simultaneously, combining practical effectiveness with symbolic communication that would reinforce royal authority throughout the kingdom. A show of force that quickly suppressed rebellion demonstrated royal power to potential troublemakers while also providing opportunities for loyal soldiers to distinguish themselves in royal service and advance their careers through demonstrated competence and loyalty. The wealth captured during such campaigns could help offset the costs of military operations while providing resources for public works projects that would benefit the loyal population and demonstrate the pharaoh's care for his subjects. Prisoners taken during the suppression of rebellions could be relocated to other parts of the kingdom where they could be better supervised and gradually integrated into loyal Egyptian society, their labor contributing to construction projects that enhanced royal prestige and provincial prosperity. But the cosmic significance of these military actions went beyond their practical effects, serving theological purposes that were as important as their immediate political consequences. In ancient Egyptian theology, the pharaoh's role as divine ruler required him to actively combat the forces of chaos that constantly threatened to overwhelm civilized order. Military campaigns against rebels were understood as cosmic battles between the forces of Ma'at and the powers of Isfet, chaos, lies, and destruction that sought to destroy divine order and return the universe to primordial chaos. The pharaoh who failed to take decisive action against such threats was not just a weak ruler but a cosmic failure who endangered the entire universe by abandoning his divine responsibility to maintain order. This theological understanding created enormous pressure for pharaohs to respond forcefully to any challenge to royal authority, regardless of the human cost of such responses. The cosmic stakes involved in maintaining divine order were understood to be so high that virtually any sacrifice could be justified if it preserved the cosmic balance that protected Egyptian civilization. The administrative aftermath of military campaigns often required decisions that seemed harsh by modern standards but were considered necessary for maintaining divine order and preventing future rebellions. Rebel leaders might be executed not out of personal vengeance but as public demonstrations that challenges to Ma'at would be met with decisive response. These executions served multiple purposes: eliminating potential future troublemakers, demonstrating royal determination to maintain order, and providing ritual closure that restored cosmic balance. The families of defeated rebels might be relocated to other parts of the kingdom where they could be better supervised and gradually integrated into loyal Egyptian society. This policy served practical security purposes by removing potential sources of future unrest while also demonstrating royal mercy toward those who had not directly participated in rebellion. The relocation process often provided opportunities for royal clemency toward individuals who demonstrated genuine repentance and willingness to serve Egyptian interests. The wealth and property of defeated rebels was typically redistributed according to principles that reinforced royal authority and rewarded loyalty while also serving broader social and economic purposes. Some confiscated wealth might be given to soldiers who had distinguished themselves in the campaign, creating incentives for military service while also strengthening the economic position of families whose loyalty was essential for royal security. Other portions of confiscated property might be allocated to public works projects that would benefit the general population, irrigation systems that would improve agricultural productivity, roads that would facilitate trade and communication, or storage facilities that would help communities weather future emergencies. These projects demonstrated the pharaoh's care for his subjects while also creating visible monuments to royal justice and the benefits of loyalty to divine authority. Still other resources might be dedicated to temple construction that would honor the gods who had granted victory to the pharaoh's forces, fulfilling religious obligations while also creating impressive architectural monuments that would reinforce royal prestige for future generations. The construction of temples provided employment for skilled craftsmen and laborers while also strengthening the religious foundations that supported divine kingship. These redistributions were not arbitrary acts of favoritism but carefully calculated decisions designed to strengthen the social and economic foundations of Egyptian civilization while also reinforcing the theological principles that justified pharaonic authority. Every allocation of resources served multiple purposes, combining practical benefits with symbolic communication that reinforced the cosmic significance of royal decisions and the divine framework within which Egyptian society operated. The record-keeping that accompanied these decisions was as important as the decisions themselves, serving both administrative and theological purposes that ensured the proper implementation of royal will while also preserving the historical narrative that justified divine authority. Court scribes carefully documented the reasoning behind royal actions, the consultations that preceded them, and the results that followed, creating detailed records that would guide future decisions and preserve royal wisdom for posterity. These records served multiple purposes within the governmental system. They provided precedents for future decisions when similar situations arose, demonstrated the pharaoh's adherence to cosmic principles and divine guidance, created accountability mechanisms that helped ensure proper implementation of royal commands, and preserved the historical narrative that would maintain royal prestige long after specific events had faded from immediate memory. The language used in these official records was carefully chosen to emphasize the cosmic significance of royal actions while minimizing their human costs and maximizing their theological justification. Rebellions were described as manifestations of cosmic chaos that threatened universal order rather than political disagreements that might have legitimate grievances. Military campaigns became divine missions to restore Ma'at and protect civilization from destruction rather than political expedients designed to maintain royal authority. The suffering of individuals was systematically subordinated to the greater good of maintaining the divine order that protected all of Egypt from chaos and destruction. This rhetorical framework helped maintain the theological coherence of divine kingship while also providing psychological support for pharaohs who had to make difficult decisions that caused human suffering in service of cosmic responsibility. As the day progresses and the weight of divine responsibility continues to rest upon the pharaoh's shoulders like an invisible mantle woven from the expectations of gods and mortals alike, we must contemplate how these ancient rulers understood their role not merely as political leaders but as cosmic forces maintaining the delicate balance between order and chaos that governed all existence. The afternoon hours in the royal palace were often devoted to the kinds of decisions that most clearly demonstrated the intersection between divine authority and practical necessity, where the pharaoh's cosmic obligations required actions that would echo through eternity. In the quieter chambers of the palace, away from the formal grandeur of the main throne room with its overwhelming displays of royal power, the pharaoh would often meet with judicial officials and legal advisors to review cases that required royal intervention. These sessions took place in rooms specifically designed for contemplation and careful deliberation, sacred spaces with high ceilings that allowed thoughts and prayers to rise freely toward the realm of the gods, walls decorated with scenes of Ma'at weighing hearts against feathers in the eternal judgment that awaited all souls, and furniture arranged to facilitate serious discussion among trusted counselors who understood the cosmic significance of their deliberations. The legal system of ancient Egypt was fundamentally different from modern concepts of jurisprudence, based as it was on the principle that all justice flowed directly from the pharaoh as the earthly representative of divine order and cosmic truth. Local magistrates and provincial governors could handle routine matters involving disputes between ordinary citizens, but cases involving serious crimes, challenges to royal authority, or complex disputes between powerful parties ultimately required pharaonic judgment that could draw upon divine wisdom and cosmic perspective unavailable to mere mortals. The pharaoh's legal decisions were understood not just as applications of human law but as manifestations of cosmic principle that maintained universal balance and ensured that the eternal struggle between Ma'at and Isfet would continue to favor order over chaos. Every judgment rendered in the royal name carried theological significance that extended far beyond the immediate parties involved, contributing to the cosmic narrative that sustained Egyptian civilization and protected it from the forces of destruction that constantly threatened to overwhelm human achievement. Consider the pharaoh reviewing a case involving corruption among high-ranking officials, a scenario that occurred with disturbing frequency in a governmental system that extended across vast distances and involved enormous sums of wealth and resources. Perhaps a provincial governor has been discovered enriching himself by demanding excessive tribute from local communities while reporting lower collection amounts to the royal treasury, effectively stealing from both the crown and the people he was sworn to serve and protect. The evidence in such cases was often overwhelming and undeniable, written records carefully maintained by royal scribes documenting the discrepancies between reported and actual collections, testimony from multiple witnesses including merchants, farmers, and local officials who had observed the corruption firsthand, and physical proof in the form of wealth and luxury goods that far exceeded what the officials' legitimate income could possibly support. The corruption was not just financially damaging but represented a fundamental violation of the cosmic order that sustained Egyptian society. From a purely practical standpoint, such corruption threatened the economic foundation of the Egyptian state in ways that could cascade through the entire governmental system. If provincial officials could steal from the royal treasury with impunity, the resources needed for defense against foreign enemies, maintenance of irrigation systems, construction of temples that ensured divine favor, and support of the vast bureaucracy that governed the kingdom would be insufficient to maintain Egyptian civilization at the level of prosperity and power that divine kingship required. The economic impact of corruption extended far beyond simple theft, creating systemic weaknesses that could undermine royal authority and threaten the stability of the entire kingdom. Other officials, seeing corruption go unpunished, might be tempted to engage in similar practices, creating a cascade of theft and abuse that could ultimately bankrupt the royal treasury and destroy the economic foundations upon which Egyptian power rested. The tolerance of corruption could signal royal weakness and invite challenges to divine authority from both internal and external enemies. But from the cosmic perspective that guided pharaonic decision-making, corruption represented something far more dangerous than mere economic loss or political weakness. It was a manifestation of Isfet, the principle of chaos, lies, and disorder that constantly threatened to overwhelm the cosmic balance maintained by Ma'at and return the universe to the primordial chaos that existed before the gods established divine order. Allowing corruption to continue unpunished would not just weaken the state financially but would invite cosmic catastrophe by abandoning the divine principles that protected Egyptian civilization from destruction. The theological framework that governed royal responses to corruption was complex and sophisticated, based on centuries of religious thought that had developed detailed understanding of the cosmic forces that sustained universal order. Corruption was understood not as a simple moral failing but as a form of cosmic rebellion that aligned corrupt officials with the forces of chaos and made them enemies of divine order. The punishment of corrupt officials was therefore not just administrative discipline but cosmic warfare that preserved the balance between order and chaos. The pharaoh's response to such cases had to serve multiple purposes simultaneously, combining practical governmental needs with theological requirements that maintained cosmic balance. The punishment of corrupt officials demonstrated royal commitment to justice and divine order, serving as a deterrent to potential future corruption while also restoring the cosmic balance that had been disrupted by the violation of Ma'at. The harshness of these punishments was measured not by modern standards of proportionality but by ancient Egyptian understanding of cosmic necessity and divine justice. The deliberations that preceded such judgments often revealed the complex web of relationships and obligations that connected all levels of Egyptian society in ways that made individual cases representative of broader systemic issues. A corrupt provincial governor might have family members serving in other official positions throughout the governmental hierarchy, business relationships with important merchants whose loyalty was essential for trade and economic prosperity, or religious obligations to specific temples whose priests wielded significant influence over popular opinion and divine favor. The pharaoh's decision about punishment had to consider not just the individual case but its broader implications for the stability and integrity of the entire governmental system. Too lenient a response might encourage further corruption and signal royal weakness, while too harsh a punishment might disrupt important relationships and create enemies who could pose future threats to royal authority. The cosmic perspective required solutions that would restore divine order while also maintaining the practical relationships necessary for effective governance. In the pharaoh's private consultation chambers, where these difficult decisions were carefully considered and debated, advisors would present different perspectives on appropriate responses to corruption cases, each viewpoint reflecting different aspects of royal responsibility and different understanding of what actions would best serve Egyptian interests. Some advisors might argue for maximum severity as a demonstration of royal commitment to justice and a deterrent to future wrongdoing, emphasizing the cosmic significance of maintaining Ma'at and the divine obligation to punish violations of cosmic order. Others might suggest more moderate approaches that would punish the guilty party while minimizing disruption to existing administrative arrangements and preserving important relationships that serve broader governmental interests. These advisors might emphasize the practical considerations that had to be balanced against theological requirements, pointing out that excessive punishment could create new problems while failing to address the underlying conditions that had made corruption possible in the first place. Still others might focus on recovering stolen resources and preventing future corruption through improved oversight procedures and administrative reforms that would strengthen the governmental system while also demonstrating royal wisdom and foresight. These advisors understood that corruption often flourished in situations where oversight was inadequate and accountability mechanisms were weak, suggesting that systemic reforms might be more effective than individual punishments in preventing future problems. The pharaoh had to synthesize these competing perspectives while maintaining focus on the cosmic principles that justified divine authority and sustained Egyptian civilization. The decision reached would be presented not as a compromise between different human viewpoints but as a manifestation of divine wisdom that perfectly balanced the demands of justice, mercy, and practical necessity. The appearance of divine certainty was essential even when the underlying human deliberations had been marked by uncertainty and conflicting advice. The implementation of pharaonic justice often required elaborate ceremonial procedures that reinforced the cosmic significance of royal decisions while also serving important social and psychological functions that maintained public support for divine authority. Public executions, when deemed necessary, were conducted according to ancient rituals that emphasized not personal vengeance but the restoration of divine order and the cosmic necessity of maintaining Ma'at against the forces of chaos and destruction. These ceremonies were carefully choreographed events that served multiple purposes within Egyptian society, providing public demonstrations of royal power while also offering opportunities for collective participation in the restoration of cosmic order. The condemned person might be required to make public confession of their crimes, acknowledging not just their practical wrongdoing but their violation of cosmic principles that sustained universal balance. This confession served to educate the public about the theological significance of corruption while also providing symbolic closure that restored cosmic harmony. The redistribution of property confiscated from corrupt officials followed similar patterns of cosmic symbolism, with every allocation serving both practical and theological purposes that reinforced royal authority while also benefiting Egyptian society. Stolen wealth might be dedicated to temple construction projects that honored the gods and demonstrated royal piety, serving as a form of cosmic restitution that restored the divine favor that had been endangered by corruption. Some confiscated resources might be distributed to the communities that had suffered from the corruption, restoring to them what had been illegally taken while also demonstrating the pharaoh's care for his subjects and his commitment to protecting them from abuse by corrupt officials. This redistribution served both practical and symbolic purposes, providing tangible benefits to loyal citizens while also reinforcing the understanding that royal authority existed to protect the innocent and maintain cosmic justice. Still, other portions of confiscated wealth might be allocated to public works projects that would benefit Egyptian society while creating visible monuments to royal justice and the consequences of violating cosmic order. Roads, irrigation systems, storage facilities, and other infrastructure projects provided employment for loyal workers while also strengthening the economic foundations that supported Egyptian prosperity and power. These ceremonies of justice and restitution served important social and psychological functions beyond their immediate practical effects, providing outlets for popular participation in the maintenance of cosmic order while also reinforcing the theological principles that justified divine kingship. They provided public demonstrations of royal power that reminded all citizens of the consequences of challenging divine authority, while also offering symbolic closure to communities that had suffered from corruption or other crimes. The rituals also created opportunities for loyal officials to demonstrate their commitment to royal service and cosmic order through their participation in the ceremonies and their public support for royal justice. These demonstrations of loyalty served both practical and symbolic purposes, identifying reliable supporters of royal authority while also providing examples of proper behavior that other officials could emulate. Most importantly, these ceremonies generated narratives of divine justice that would be preserved in official records and popular memory, contributing to the cultural understanding of royal authority and cosmic responsibility that sustained Egyptian civilization across centuries of change and challenge. The stories told about royal justice became part of the broader mythology that supported divine kingship and provided moral guidance for future generations. The psychological impact of these judicial proceedings on the pharaoh himself was something that royal ideology preferred not to acknowledge directly but that nonetheless shaped the character of pharaonic rule in profound and lasting ways. The burden of making life and death decisions about individuals while maintaining focus on cosmic principles required a kind of psychological compartmentalization that few human beings have ever been asked to develop. The pharaoh had to cultivate the ability to see individual suffering as regrettable but necessary sacrifice for the greater good of universal order, while also maintaining the emotional sensitivity necessary for effective leadership and human relationships. This psychological balancing act required enormous mental discipline and emotional control that could exact a heavy toll on even the strongest personalities. The royal chambers where these difficult decisions were made often became spaces of intense contemplation and spiritual preparation, where the pharaoh would spend hours in prayer and meditation seeking divine guidance for decisions that would affect not just the immediate parties involved but the broader health of Egyptian civilization. The walls of these chambers, decorated with scenes of divine judgment and cosmic balance, served as constant reminders of the eternal principles that should guide all royal decisions. The afternoon light filtering through high windows would cast changing patterns of illumination across these contemplative spaces, creating an environment conducive to the deep reflection that such decisions required. The pharaoh, temporarily setting aside the elaborate ceremonial garments that marked public appearances, might sit in simpler robes that allowed for more comfortable contemplation while still maintaining the dignity appropriate to divine status. As the sun begins its descent toward the western horizon, painting the sky in shades of gold and amber that the ancient Egyptians associated with the divine realm of Ra, we find ourselves in the more contemplative hours of the pharaoh's day. This is the time when the weight of cosmic responsibility becomes most palpable, when the decisions made in the harsh light of day must be integrated into the eternal perspective that sustained divine rulership across the centuries. The evening hours in the royal palace were traditionally devoted to ceremonies and activities that connected the pharaoh's earthly authority with the cosmic forces that governed the universe. These were not mere religious observances but essential practices that maintained the divine sanction upon which all pharaonic power ultimately depended. The harsh decisions that had been made during the day, executions ordered, rebellion suppressed, corrupt officials punished, were reframed in these evening rituals as necessary actions in the eternal struggle between Ma'at and Isfet, order and chaos, truth and falsehood. Picture the pharaoh in the palace's private temple complex, a series of chambers and courtyards designed specifically for the royal performance of religious duties that were too sacred to be conducted in public. These spaces were among the most beautiful and spiritually powerful in the entire palace, their walls covered with religious texts and images that had been created by the finest artists and scribes in the kingdom. The very air seemed charged with divine presence, perfumed with the finest incenses and illuminated by lamps whose oil had been blessed by the highest priests. In these sacred spaces, the pharaoh would undergo the evening transformation from active ruler to contemplative divine being. The elaborate ceremonial garments worn during the day's public audiences would be replaced by simpler but equally symbolic robes appropriate for direct communion with the gods. The heavy crown that marked earthly authority would be set aside in favor of simpler headdresses that emphasized the pharaoh's role as high priest and divine intermediary. The evening religious ceremonies began with purification rituals that cleansed the pharaoh of the spiritual contamination that inevitably accompanied the exercise of earthly power. Even necessary actions taken in service of cosmic order could create spiritual imbalance that needed to be corrected through proper ritual observance. Water drawn from sacred wells was used to wash away the day's accumulated spiritual burdens, while incense smoke carried prayers of purification toward the realm of the gods. These purification ceremonies were followed by offerings and prayers that explicitly connected the day's decisions with cosmic necessity. The pharaoh would make offerings of food, drink, and precious objects to images of Ma'at, acknowledging that all royal actions were taken in service of divine order rather than personal will. Prayers would be offered asking for continued divine guidance in future decisions and expressing gratitude for the cosmic support that made wise judgment possible. The psychological function of these evening rituals was as important as their spiritual significance. They provided a framework for processing the emotional and psychological impacts of the difficult decisions that pharaonic responsibility required. By recontextualizing harsh actions as cosmic necessities, the rituals helped maintain the pharaoh's sense of divine purpose while acknowledging the human cost of maintaining universal order. Consider how these evening ceremonies would address the specific decisions made during the day. If the pharaoh had ordered the execution of corrupt officials, the evening prayers would emphasize how this action served to maintain the cosmic balance that protected all of Egypt from chaos and destruction. The suffering caused by such decisions would be acknowledged but placed within the larger context of cosmic necessity that made individual sacrifice meaningful and justified. If military action had been authorized against rebellious provinces, the evening rituals would focus on the pharaoh's role as cosmic warrior fighting to preserve civilization against the forces of chaos. The deaths that would result from such campaigns would be understood not as meaningless violence but as necessary sacrifices in the eternal battle between order and disorder that shaped the very structure of the universe. The temple chambers where these evening ceremonies took place were designed to facilitate the deep contemplation that such spiritual work required. High ceilings allowed prayers and incense smoke to rise freely toward the realm of the gods, while carefully positioned windows admitted the changing light of sunset that marked the daily transition from active rule to contemplative reflection. The acoustics of these spaces were precisely calculated to give the pharaoh's prayers and chants a resonant quality that seemed to carry beyond the physical realm toward divine ears. The artistic decoration of these private religious spaces was among the finest in the entire palace complex. Walls were covered with painted reliefs depicting the pharaoh in direct communion with various deities, receiving divine guidance and protection that enabled wise rule and cosmic balance. These images served not just as decoration but as visual theology that reinforced the divine framework within which all pharaonic decisions were made and justified. As the evening progressed and the sun sank lower toward the western horizon, the pharaoh's contemplations would often turn toward the eternal perspective that gave meaning to temporal decisions. The harsh actions taken during the day were understood as momentary necessities in a cosmic drama that extended far beyond any individual reign or historical period. The pharaoh's role was not to avoid difficult decisions but to make them with proper attention to divine principle and cosmic consequence. The evening meal that followed these religious observances provided an opportunity for more informal reflection on the day's events. In the private dining chambers, surrounded by family members and the most trusted advisors, the pharaoh could discuss the human dimension of divine rulership while never abandoning the cosmic perspective that justified pharaonic authority. These conversations were carefully balanced between acknowledgement of practical realities and maintenance of the divine ideology that sustained royal power. The food served at these evening meals was as carefully chosen as everything else in the pharaoh's environment. Dishes might include fish from the sacred lakes of temple complexes, bread made from grain that had been blessed by priests, fruits and vegetables grown in palace gardens that were tended with religious devotion. Even the act of eating became a religious observance that connected the pharaoh's physical body with the divine forces that sustained all life. The wine served at these evening meals was often imported from special vineyards that had been dedicated to specific deities, its consumption understood as a form of communion with divine forces. The gentle relaxation that came from moderate wine consumption helped facilitate the transition from the intense focus required for daytime decision-making to the more contemplative state appropriate for evening reflection and spiritual practice. As darkness fell and the palace was illuminated by countless oil lamps whose flames flickered like earthly stars, the pharaoh's thoughts would naturally turn toward the eternal legacy that would survive long after the current reign had ended. The decisions made during the day would become part of the historical record that would be preserved in temple inscriptions, tomb decorations, and official chronicles. Future generations would judge these actions not by their immediate human consequences but by their contribution to the maintenance of cosmic order that protected Egyptian civilization across the centuries. The evening hours also provided time for private audiences with family members whose perspectives could provide emotional support and practical wisdom for the isolated figure who bore ultimate responsibility for cosmic order. Queens, royal children, and other family members offered the pharaoh glimpses of normal human relationships while respecting the divine status that set the ruler apart from ordinary mortals. These family interactions were carefully structured by royal protocol but nonetheless provided essential psychological support for individuals carrying burdens that no ordinary human being could be expected to bear. The pharaoh's family members understood that their role was not just to provide personal companionship but to help maintain the psychological stability that effective divine rulership required. As the evening deepened and the time for sleep approached, the pharaoh's final contemplations of the day would focus on the eternal principles that would guide tomorrow's decisions and all the days that followed. The cycle of cosmic responsibility would begin again with the sunrise, bringing new challenges that would require the same careful balance between human wisdom and divine authority that had shaped the decisions of this day. As the night deepens and the palace settles into the quieter rhythms of evening, we accompany the pharaoh through the final hours before sleep, when the accumulated weight of divine responsibility must be carefully set aside to allow for the restorative rest that will prepare the royal body and mind for another day of cosmic duty. These evening hours represent a crucial transition from the active exercise of divine authority to the passive receptivity that allows for spiritual renewal and divine guidance through dreams and visions. The preparation for royal sleep was itself a sacred ritual, as carefully choreographed as any public ceremony and charged with spiritual significance that extended far beyond mere physical rest. The pharaoh's bedchambers were located in the most protected and sacred part of the palace complex, surrounded by multiple layers of security and spiritual protection that would ensure the divine ruler's safety during the vulnerable hours of sleep. Imagine these private chambers as sanctuaries within sanctuaries, spaces designed to facilitate the deepest possible rest while maintaining connection with the cosmic forces that sustained pharaonic authority. The walls were covered with protective texts and images drawn from the most sacred religious traditions, excerpts from the pyramid texts that would guide the pharaoh's soul through the nightly journey into the realm of dreams, depictions of protective deities who would guard against malevolent forces, and astronomical charts that connected the royal sleeping chamber with the eternal movements of stars and planets. The ritual preparation for sleep began with the careful removal of the day's ceremonial garments and royal regalia. Each item was handled with reverence by trusted servants who understood that they were not merely undressing a human being but carefully dismantling the visible manifestations of divine authority that would be reassembled when morning came. The heavy crown, the elaborate collar necklaces, the ceremonial kilts and robes, all were reverently placed in their designated resting places where they would await the next day's transformation of human ruler into divine king. The pharaoh's body was then cleansed with water that had been drawn from sacred wells and perfumed with oils that carried the blessings of various protective deities. This was not ordinary bathing but a purification ritual that washed away the spiritual residue of the day's difficult decisions and prepared the royal physical form for direct communion with divine forces during sleep. Attendants worked with meditation and prayer, understanding that they were preparing a living God for sacred rest rather than simply caring for a human body. The sleeping garments that replaced the day's ceremonial dress were made of the finest linen, so perfectly woven that it felt like wearing captured moonlight against the skin. These garments were often embroidered with protective symbols and blessed by priests before being presented to the pharaoh, creating a cocoon of spiritual protection that would surround the royal body throughout the night. The very act of putting on these sacred sleeping clothes was understood as donning armor against the spiritual forces that might threaten a divine ruler during the vulnerable hours of sleep. The royal bed itself was a masterpiece of both craftsmanship and magical protection. Constructed of the finest woods and decorated with precious metals and stones, it was positioned according to astronomical calculations that aligned the sleeping pharaoh with beneficial cosmic forces. The headboard often depicted protective deities, while the footboard might show scenes of the pharaoh's successful journey through the underworld realm that souls visited during sleep. Even the mattress and pillows were filled with materials that had been blessed for their protective and restorative properties. Around the bed, braziers burned special incenses designed to promote prophetic dreams and maintain spiritual protection throughout the night. These were not ordinary perfumes but carefully prepared compounds that included frankincense for divine communication, myrrh for purification, and other precious resins that created an atmosphere conducive to spiritual revelation. The smoke from these braziers created shifting patterns of light and shadow that seemed to connect the sleeping chamber with the mysterious realm of divine visions. The lighting in the bedchamber was carefully controlled to facilitate the transition from waking consciousness to sacred sleep. Oil lamps with specially designed shades created pools of soft illumination that could be gradually dimmed as the pharaoh prepared for rest. These lights were positioned to avoid creating harsh shadows that might disturb the peaceful atmosphere while providing enough illumination for the pharaoh to move safely within the chamber. As the pharaoh settled into the sacred bed, trusted guards took their positions at carefully designated points throughout the chamber and adjoining rooms. These were not ordinary soldiers but elite warriors who had been specially chosen and spiritually prepared for the sacred duty of protecting the divine ruler during sleep. They understood that they were guarding not just a human being but a cosmic force whose safety was essential for the continued stability of the universe. The final preparations for sleep included prayers and meditations that formally released the day's accumulated responsibilities and opened the pharaoh's consciousness to divine guidance through dreams. These prayers acknowledged the cosmic burden that had been carried during the day while expressing confidence that divine forces would provide the wisdom and strength needed for future challenges. The act of prayer itself became a form of surrender that allowed the human consciousness within the divine role to finally rest from its constant vigilance. The pharaoh's private reflections during these final waking moments often focused on the eternal perspective that gave meaning to temporal decisions. The harsh actions that had been necessary during the day were understood as temporary necessities in a cosmic drama that extended far beyond any individual lifetime. The suffering that such decisions caused was real and regrettable, but it was outweighed by the greater good of maintaining the divine order that protected Egyptian civilization from chaos and destruction. These bedtime contemplations might also include thoughts about the dreams and visions that would come during sleep. In ancient Egyptian belief, dreams were direct communications from the divine realm, opportunities for gods to provide guidance and warnings to their earthly representative. The pharaoh approached sleep not as an escape from responsibility but as another form of divine service that could provide essential guidance for future decisions. The silence that settled over the royal bedchamber as the pharaoh prepared for sleep was not empty but filled with spiritual presence. The protective deities depicted on the walls seemed to come alive in the flickering lamplight, their painted eyes watching over the sleeping divine ruler with eternal vigilance. The very air seemed charged with the accumulated prayers and blessings that had been offered in this sacred space across the years of the pharaoh's reign. As consciousness began to fade and the boundary between waking and sleeping became blurred, the pharaoh's awareness would gradually shift from the immediate concerns of earthly rulership to the timeless perspective of divine authority. The weight of cosmic responsibility did not disappear during sleep but was transformed into a different kind of spiritual work, the reception of divine guidance that would inform future decisions and the participation in cosmic processes that sustained the fundamental order of the universe. The transition into sleep was understood as a form of death and rebirth that occurred each night, connecting the pharaoh's personal experience with the cosmic cycle of renewal that governed all existence. Just as the sun god Ra traveled through the underworld each night to be reborn with the dawn, so the pharaoh's consciousness journeyed through the realm of dreams to emerge refreshed and renewed for another day of divine service. The breathing that deepened as sleep approached was understood as a form of cosmic rhythm that connected the pharaoh's physical body with the fundamental forces that governed the universe. Each breath was a participation in the divine wind that had first brought life to the world, while each heartbeat echoed the eternal rhythms that sustained the movement of stars and planets across the heavens. As the final moments of consciousness slip away like sand through gentle fingers, we accompany the pharaoh into the deepest realms of sacred rest, where the earthly burdens of divine rulership dissolve into the timeless embrace of cosmic renewal. This is the most profound transition of all, from the active exercise of divine authority to the passive receptivity that allows for complete spiritual restoration and the reception of divine wisdom through dreams and visions. The darkness that settles over the royal bedchamber is not empty but filled with protective presence, as if the very walls themselves are breathing with the accumulated blessings of centuries of royal rest. The oil lamps have been dimmed to their lowest possible glow, creating an environment that exists at the threshold between the material world of daily responsibility and the spiritual realm where divine guidance flows freely to those prepared to receive it. In these final minutes before complete surrender to sleep, the Pharaoh's consciousness undergoes a gradual transformation that mirrors the cosmic processes that govern the universe itself. Just as the sun god Ra must journey through the underworld each night to be reborn with the dawn, so the Pharaoh's awareness must release its hold on earthly concerns to participate in the eternal cycles of death and renewal that sustain all existence. The breathing that grows deeper and more rhythmic with each passing moment becomes a form of cosmic participation, connecting the Pharaoh's physical form with the fundamental forces that govern wind and weather, the rise and fall of the Nile, the movement of celestial bodies across the star-filled sky. Each inhalation draws in not just air but the essence of divine authority that will sustain another day of cosmic responsibility, while each exhalation releases the accumulated tensions and difficulties that even divine rulership cannot avoid. The sounds that drift through the palace complex during these late evening hours create a symphony of protected peace, the distant chanting of priests conducting midnight rituals in the temple chambers, the soft footsteps of guards maintaining their vigilant watch over the sleeping divine ruler, the gentle murmur of fountains and irrigation channels that bring the life-giving waters of the Nile into the very heart of the royal residence. As consciousness fades, the harsh realities that have occupied the Pharaoh's attention throughout the day begin to transform into something more archetypal and eternal. The rebels who were punished become manifestations of cosmic chaos that must always be confronted by the forces of order. The officials who were executed for corruption become symbols of the moral decay that divine authority must constantly combat to preserve the integrity of civilized life. The military campaigns that were authorized become episodes in the eternal struggle between civilization and barbarism that gives meaning to all royal action. This transformation of specific historical events into eternal patterns is not an escape from reality but a deepening into the most fundamental reality of all, the cosmic principles that govern the universe and give meaning to human existence. In the realm of dreams that the Pharaoh now enters, the divine perspective that justifies difficult decisions becomes not just intellectual understanding but direct spiritual experience. The protective deities whose images adorn the walls of the royal bedchamber seem to step forward from their painted backgrounds to surround the sleeping pharaoh with their benevolent presence. Isis extends her winged arms to provide maternal protection, while Horus keeps watch with the keen eyes of a falcon who can see danger approaching from vast distances. Thoth stands ready to record divine revelations in the eternal annals of cosmic wisdom, while Ma'at ensures that even the Pharaoh's dreams will conform to the principles of truth and justice that govern all existence. In this protected environment, the Pharaoh's sleeping consciousness can safely explore the spiritual dimensions of divine rulership that remain hidden during the practical demands of waking life. Dreams become classrooms where the cosmic significance of earthly decisions is revealed through symbolic narratives that connect specific historical events with eternal principles. The suffering caused by necessary punishments is shown to be part of larger patterns of cosmic balance that ultimately serve the greater good of universal order. The visions that come during the deepest stages of sleep often provide guidance for future decisions, revealing the hidden connections between apparently separate events and illuminating the long-term consequences of different possible courses of action. The pharaoh who must decide whether to launch a military campaign might dream of cosmic battles between order and chaos, receiving divine insight into the spiritual dimensions of what appears to be merely political choice. These dream revelations are understood not as subjective psychological phenomena but as direct communications from the divine realm, messages from the gods who guide and protect their earthly representative through the complex challenges of maintaining cosmic order in the material world. The wisdom received through such dreams becomes as authoritative as any advice offered by human counselors, often more so because it comes directly from divine sources without the limitations and biases that affect human perspective. As the night progresses through its deepest hours, the pharaoh's sleeping consciousness participates in cosmic processes that sustain the fundamental order of the universe. The royal soul joins the sun god Ra in his nightly journey through the underworld, helping to combat the forces of chaos that threaten to prevent the dawn from coming. This is not mere metaphor but literal spiritual work that divine rulers perform even during sleep, their cosmic authority extending beyond the boundaries of waking consciousness into the eternal realm where the basic patterns of existence are maintained and renewed. The peace that settles over the Pharaoh's sleeping form is not merely personal rest but cosmic tranquility, a temporary cessation of the struggle between order and chaos that allows for the restoration of divine energy needed for continued cosmic service. The breathing that becomes so slow and regular it seems almost suspended connects the royal body with the eternal rhythms that govern the movement of stars and planets, the cycle of seasons, the rise and fall of civilizations across the vast expanse of historical time. In this state of profound rest, the weight of individual decisions dissolves into the larger pattern of cosmic necessity that makes all royal action meaningful and justified. The pharaoh who had to order executions, suppress rebellions, and punish corruption rests peacefully in the knowledge that these actions served eternal principles that transcend human understanding and individual suffering. The silence that envelopes the royal bedchamber is pregnant with divine presence, as if the very air holds its breath in reverence for the sacred rest that restores the earthly representative of cosmic authority. Guards maintain their vigilant watch not just over a sleeping human being but over a living link between the mortal and divine realms whose safety is essential for the continued stability of the universe itself. As the hours pass and dawn approaches, the pharaoh's sleeping consciousness begins the gradual return journey from the depths of cosmic participation to the surface of earthly awareness. But this return is not a loss but a renewal, bringing back divine wisdom and cosmic perspective that will inform another day of sacred responsibility. The harsh decisions that will need to be made in the coming day are already being prepared in the realm of dreams, their cosmic necessity revealed through divine guidance that transcends human limitation. The first stirrings of returning consciousness bring with them not the weight of burden but the lightness of renewed purpose, the confidence that comes from direct divine communication and the strength that flows from participation in eternal cosmic processes. The pharaoh who awakens from such sacred rest carries within consciousness not just human wisdom but divine authority refreshed and renewed for continued service to the cosmic order that protects and sustains all existence. And in this eternal pattern of rest and renewal, service and restoration, human wisdom and divine authority, we find the true meaning of ancient Egyptian kingship, not merely political power but cosmic responsibility, not merely human rulership but divine service, not merely historical leadership but eternal participation in the fundamental forces that govern the universe and give meaning to all existence. Sleep comes now as the deepest blessing, the ultimate rest, the final embrace of cosmic peace that restores and renews all who serve the eternal principles of Ma'at, truth, justice, and divine order that sustain the universe through all the changes of time and the challenges of earthly existence. In this sacred rest, all consciousness merges with the eternal, all responsibility dissolves into cosmic acceptance, all effort transforms into effortless being, and all earthly concerns fade into the infinite peace of divine embrace. Rest now in the eternal wisdom of the ages, in the cosmic embrace that sustains all existence, in the divine peace that transcends all understanding and restores all who serve the eternal order that governs the universe. Sleep comes as the final gift, the ultimate blessing, the sacred rest that renews and restores and prepares for eternal service to the cosmic principles that give meaning to all existence. Let consciousness fade into the infinite peace of divine rest, where all struggle ceases and all service finds its ultimate meaning in the eternal embrace of cosmic order, truth, justice, and divine love that sustains the universe through all eternity.